The door to the penthouse suite splintered at the handle, flying inward with a force that sent a shockwave of silence through the room. A woman stood in the doorway, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a righteous fire that promised to burn everything in its path. She hadn't counted on the dozen men in sharp, dark suits whose conversations had cut off mid-syllable. She hadn't counted on the thick scent of expensive cigars and aged whiskey, and she certainly hadn't counted on the man sitting at the head of the mahogany table, a king on his throne, who looked at her not with anger, but with a slow, unfolding amusement that was far more terrifying. She thought she was crashing a cheating boyfriend's business meeting, but she had just walked into the den of the city's most dangerous man, and he had no intention of letting her leave. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The fury had been a living thing inside Valentina Cruz for exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes. It had started as a sick, coiling knot in her stomach when the text message lit up her phone screen. It was from a work acquaintance, a woman named Chloe whose sympathy felt as fake as her eyelashes. But the photo she'd sent was brutally real. There was Mark, Valentina's boyfriend of 2 years, his arm slung casually around a blonde with a smile as wide and empty as a canyon. The caption was simple, devastating. Grand Elysian Hotel. He said it was a business meeting. Thought you should know. For a moment, Valentina couldn't breathe. The world narrowed to the glowing screen, to the casual betrayal in Mark's posture. The business meeting. He had kissed her goodbye that morning, his lips tasting of coffee and lies, murmuring about a big pitch with investors that could secure their future. Our time's future, he'd said. The words now echoed with a hollow mockery. The anger came next, a hot, cleansing wave that washed away the initial shock. It propelled her from her chair, had her grabbing her keys, and sent her marching toward the door with a singular, destructive purpose. She wasn't a woman who cried. She was a woman who fought, and Mark was about to find out just how hard she could fight. The drive to the Grand Elysian was a blur of red lights and blaring horns, a symphony of the city's impatience that matched her own. She pictured the confrontation, replaying it in her mind like a film. She would burst in, a hurricane of righteous indignation. She would expose him in front of his so-called investors, lay his deceit bare for everyone to see. She wanted to humiliate him, to make him feel a fraction of the shame and fury that was consuming her. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her jaw set so tight it ached. The hotel itself was a monument to a world she didn't belong to. A uniformed doorman, looking like a general in a toy army, regarded her beat-up sedan with a flicker of disdain before his professional mask slid back into place. The lobby was a cavern of marble and gold, where the air smelled of money and perfume. Voices were hushed, footsteps silenced by plush carpets. It was designed to intimidate, to make anyone of ordinary means feel small and out of place. On any other day, it might have worked. But today, Valentina's rage was a suit of armor. It made her fearless. She bypassed the front desk, her gaze locked on the private elevator bank at the far end of the lobby. Penthouse suite, the text had said. Her heels clicked an aggressive rhythm on the polished floor, a declaration of war. A security guard stepped forward, his expression polite but firm. "May I help you, miss? I'm here for the meeting in the penthouse suite," she said, her voice sharp and clear, daring him to question her. She didn't break her stride. For a critical second, the guard hesitated, caught off guard by her absolute confidence. That second was all she needed. She swept past him and pressed the call button for the elevator. The golden doors slid open with a soft chime, and she stepped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs, not with fear, but with anticipation. The ride-up was silent, a moment of suspended reality. The anger was so pure now, so focused, it felt like a physical object lodged in her throat. This was it. The final moment before the detonation, when the elevator opened directly into a small, private foyer, she saw only one door. It was dark, imposing wood. She didn't knock. She didn't pause. She drew in one last ragged breath, channeled every ounce of her betrayal and pain, and threw her entire body weight against it. The sound of the door crashing open was like a gunshot. The scene before her was not what she expected. There was no blonde, no champagne, no evidence of a sordid affair. Instead, there was a long, polished mahogany table, surrounded by at least a dozen men. They were all dressed in impeccably tailored suits that seemed too formal for a simple business meeting. Their faces, turning toward her in unison, were hard, impassive, and dangerous. The air, thick with cigar smoke, crackled with a sudden lethal tension. Valentina's furious momentum came to a screeching halt. Her prepared speech died on her lips. This wasn't a meeting. This was a tribunal. Her eyes scanned the room, a frantic search for Mark's familiar, treacherous face, but he wasn't there. Her gaze swept past cold, assessing eyes, past faces that looked like they were carved from stone, and finally landed on the man at the head of the table. He was the center of gravity in the room. Everything and everyone orbited him. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. He simply watched her, his chin resting on his steepled fingers. He was younger than she would have expected, perhaps in his mid-30s, with dark, immaculately styled hair and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the light. A bespoke charcoal suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly, and a sliver of a white cuff peeked out, adorned with a simple, elegant silver cufflink. There was an aura of absolute power around him, a stillness that was more commanding than any shout. And on his face, as he took in her disheveled appearance, her wild eyes, and her heaving chest, a slow smile began to spread. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just seen the most fascinating new creature wander into its trap. Valentina's blood ran cold. The fire of her anger was extinguished, replaced by the icy grip of pure, unadulterated fear. She had made a terrible, catastrophic mistake. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The men lining the table were statues, their eyes fixed on their boss, waiting for a signal. Valentina felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, every part of her exposed and vulnerable. She could feel the weight of their collective gaze, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. Her mind, which had been so clear and focused moments before, was now a chaotic swirl of panic. Asterisk, wrong room, wrong meeting. Get out. Run. The man at the head of the table finally moved. He lowered his hands, placing them flat on the polished wood. The gesture was small, but it held the weight of a final judgment. "Leave us," he said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone, a calm rumble that cut through the tension like a knife. It held an authority that was absolute, unquestionable. Instantly, chairs scraped back. The dozen men rose as one, their movements fluid and economical. They filed out of the room without a word, without a single backward glance at their leader. But as they passed Valentina, their eyes lingered on her, a silent chorus of warning, pity, and morbid curiosity. The last man out pulled the heavy door shut, and the soft final click of the latch echoed in the cavernous room like a death knell. She was alone with him. He rose from his chair, his movements unhurried and graceful, like a panther unfolding from rest. He was taller than he had appeared sitting down, and he carried himself with an easy, predatory confidence that made the hairs on the back of Valentina's neck stand on end. He walked around the table, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick Persian rug. He didn't approach her directly, but circled, his dark eyes never leaving her face, studying her as if she were a piece of art he was considering acquiring. "You were expecting someone else," he stated. It wasn't a question. Valentina's voice was trapped in her throat. She could only manage a weak, pathetic nod, her body trembling. I'm so sorry," she finally managed to whisper, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I thought I had the wrong room." The man stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something else she couldn't place, something uniquely masculine and dangerous. "Your boyfriend," he repeated, the words laced with a faint, mocking amusement. "He must be a very foolish man, to cheat on a woman with so much fire in her eyes." He tilted his head. "Or perhaps he is a very brave one." Valentina flinched. He saw right through her, saw the reason for her storming in, and was dissecting it with casual precision. She felt stripped bare, her raw, messy emotions on display for this stranger's entertainment. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "I'll just go." I'm sorry for interrupting your meeting. His smile widened, a flash of white in his handsome, severe face. My meeting is over. You saw to that. You burst in here like a Valkyrie, ready to burn the world down for a man who betrayed you. It was the most interesting thing that has happened to me all week. He paused, his gaze intense, probing. I am Adrian Rossi. And you are? The name meant nothing to her, but she felt a jolt, a primal recognition of danger. This was not a man you wanted to know your name. Valentina, she breathed. Valentina, he repeated, tasting the name, a beautiful name, for a beautiful, fiery woman. He gestured toward the table. Your evening has been ruined. Allow me to salvage it. Stay, have dinner with me. The offer was so absurd, so completely out of place with the terror of the situation, that for a second, Valentina could only stare at him. Stay? Here? With him? Every instinct in her body was screaming, a high, keening wail, telling her to run and never look back. No, she said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. No, thank you. I have to leave. She tried to step around him, but he shifted, blocking her path without touching her. His smile didn't falter, but the amusement in his eyes was replaced by something harder, something possessive and unyielding. That was not a request, Valentina, he said, his voice dropping again to that soft, dangerous purr. But I admire your spirit, so I will give you a choice. He leaned in closer, his voice a mere whisper that sent a shiver down her spine, a strange, unwelcome mix of fear and thrill. You can run from me tonight. You can go home, lock your doors, and pretend this never happened. But I always get what I want, and I find that I want you. So, if you will not have dinner with me here, he smiled, a slow, deliberate expression that sealed her fate, then I will come to you. He stepped back then, creating a clear path to the door. He was letting her go, but it wasn't freedom. It was a leash, a long, invisible one, and he was holding the other end. Valentina didn't need to be told twice. She turned and fled, her hand fumbling with the doorknob. She didn't look back as she scrambled out of the suite, ran for the elevator, and jabbed the button for the lobby. As the golden doors slid shut, she caught one last glimpse of him, standing exactly where she had left him, watching her with those dark, possessive eyes, a silent promise hanging in the air between them. Her war with Mark was over before it began, but a new, far more terrifying one had just begun. The elevator ride down was an eternity in a gilded cage. Valentina's reflection in the polished gold walls was a stranger, a woman with wide, terrified eyes and a face drained of all color. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, and she pressed herself into the corner as if trying to disappear into the very structure of the building. The rage that had propelled her here was gone, incinerated by the cold, absolute power she had just witnessed. All that remained was a primal, animal fear that clawed at her insides. Adrian Rossi, the name echoed in the silent elevator, a name she felt she should know, a name that felt heavy with unspoken history and violence. When the doors finally slid open to the opulent lobby, she stumbled out, half expecting his men to be waiting for her. But the lobby was just as it was before, a hushed world of quiet wealth and indifference. The security guard she had swept past earlier now stood by the elevator bank, his face a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes followed her, and she saw a flicker of something in them, something that looked unnervingly like pity. She didn't wait for the doorman. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and ran into the cool night air, the city lights blurring through the tears of panic that now streamed freely down her face. Her car, her beat, up, familiar sedan, felt like a sanctuary. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so violently it took 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and she peeled away from the curb, driving with a reckless urgency that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with escape. Every pair of headlights in her rearview mirror was him. Every shadow in a passing alley was one of his men. His final words were a brand on her mind, a chilling whisper that promised there was no escape. Asterisk. Then I will come to you. Asterisk. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of ownership. She drove past her apartment building twice before she had the courage to park. Her small, 3rd-floor walk, up, had never felt so fragile, so vulnerable. The 3 locks on her door, which had always seemed like overkill, now felt like flimsy pieces of paper. Inside, she leaned against the door, her body sliding down to the floor as a wave of trembling overtook her. The adrenaline that had kept her moving drained away, leaving a hollow, aching terror in its place. Her apartment, with its mismatched furniture, stacks of books, and half-finished art projects, was her world. It was a world of color, creativity, and modest dreams, a world that had just been invaded by a man who lived in the shadows, a man who commanded death with a quiet word. Her phone buzzed on the floor beside her. It was Mark, a text message, asterisk, "Where are you? Thought you were coming over." Asterisk. The casual cruelty of it, the sheer, oblivious arrogance, was staggering. An hour ago, that message would have sent her into a blind rage. Now, she just stared at it, a bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. Mark and his petty betrayal were a flickering candle in the face of the inferno she had just walked into. She had been playing with matches while a man who controlled the entire forest fire had just learned her name. With a shaking finger, she blocked his number. It was a small, insignificant act, but it was the only piece of her life she felt she could control. She crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin, but sleep was a distant country she could not reach. Every creak of the old building, every siren in the distance, was the sound of him coming for her. The next day was a study in paranoia. Valentina moved through her routine like a ghost, her senses stretched to a painful degree of alertness. At her job as a freelance graphic designer, working from the small studio in her apartment, she couldn't focus. The colors on her screen seemed dull, the lines refused to resolve into anything coherent. The silence of her apartment was a living entity, pressing in on her. She kept the blinds closed, jumping at the sound of footsteps in the hallway or a car door slamming on the street below. She did a quick, frantic search for his name online, and what she found made her stomach clench with a fresh wave of fear. The articles were vague, full of whispers and allegations, but the picture they painted was clear. Adrian Rossi was not just a businessman. He was the heir to a criminal empire, a man linked to the city's underworld, a figure who operated outside the law with impunity. There were photos of him at charity galas, looking impossibly handsome and civilized, standing next to politicians and celebrities. But the text spoke of union takeovers, missing rivals, and a network of power that reached into every corner of the city. He was untouchable. By late afternoon, she had convinced herself that maybe, just maybe, she had imagined the severity of it. He was a powerful man, yes, but he was also a busy one. Perhaps she was just a momentary amusement, a brief, fiery distraction he had already forgotten. The thought was a fragile shield, but she clung to it desperately. She was nobody, a struggling artist. Why would a man like that bother with her? The knock on her door shattered her fragile hope. It wasn't a loud knock, just 2 sharp, confident raps that brooked no argument. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. She didn't move, didn't breathe, praying that whoever it was would go away. They knocked again, the same precise, patient sound. Through the peephole, she saw a man she didn't recognize. He was built like a mountain, dressed in a simple dark suit, his expression utterly blank. He wasn't looking at the peephole, he was just waiting, a statue of implacable purpose. He wasn't going away. With a sense of grim finality, she unbolted the locks. The man didn't speak. He simply held out a long, elegant black box tied with a silver ribbon. His eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, and in their depths, she saw the same cold obedience she had seen in the men in the penthouse. She took the box, her fingers numb. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, turned, and walked away. She closed and locked the door, her back pressed against it, the box held tight in her hands. It was cool to the touch. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at it. It felt like a bomb. Finally, her curiosity, laced with dread, won out. She untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a single, perfect white rose. Its petals were flawless, its scent delicate and intoxicating. Beneath it was a thick, cream-colored card. Her name, *Valentina*, was written on it in elegant, masculine script. She lifted the card. The message was simple. 7 o'clock. A car will be waiting. Asterisk below that was the name of a restaurant, Il Silenzio, a place she had only ever read about in magazines, a place known for its exclusivity and a waiting list that was years long. There was no question, no request, no option to decline. It was a summons. He hadn't forgotten. He had spent the day finding her, learning her name, her address, and now he was calling her to him. The white rose, a symbol of new beginnings, felt like a mockery. This wasn't a beginning, it was a capture. Her body trembled, but this time, a flicker of her old fire sparked through the fear. He thought he could just summon her, like a servant. He thought he could intimidate her into submission. The terror was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was joined by a stubborn, defiant anger. She would go, but she would not go as a victim. At 7:15, Valentina was ready. She had chosen her armor carefully, not a demure, frightened dress, but a sleek, form-fitting sheath of crimson red. It was a bold, defiant color, the color of fire and blood. She wore her hair down, a wild cascade of dark curls, and her makeup was dramatic, her eyes lined in black, her lips painted the same shade of defiant red as her dress. If he wanted her fire, she would give him an inferno. She looked at herself in the mirror, a warrior queen preparing for a battle she knew she would likely lose, but one she would not surrender without a fight. Exactly at 7, a sleek black town car, so dark it seemed to drink the light, pulled up to her building. The driver, another man in a dark suit with an impassive face, got out and opened the rear door for her without a word. The ride was silent, the city slipping by outside the tinted windows. They drove to a part of town she rarely visited, a quiet, historic district of cobblestone streets and old, elegant brownstones. The restaurant was discreet, its entrance marked only by a small, polished brass plaque. The moment she stepped inside, she knew he had booked the entire place. It was empty. The dining room, a beautiful space of dark wood, soft lighting, and crisp white tablecloths, was utterly silent. A single table was set in the center of the room, and he was sitting there, waiting for her. He stood as she approached, and for a moment, he simply looked at her, his dark eyes taking in her appearance. A slow, appreciative smile touched his lips. It was the same smile from the penthouse, the predator's smile, but this time, there was genuine admiration in it. "Valentina," he said, his voice a low, appreciative rumble. "You look magnificent. Red is your color." "It's the color of warning," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering. He chuckled, a low, rich sound. "Is it? I thought it was the color of passion." He pulled out her chair, a perfect gentleman. She sat, her movements stiff. "I'm glad you decided to join me." "You didn't give me much of a choice," she said, meeting his gaze across the table. "There is always a choice," he countered smoothly, resuming his seat. "You could have run. I would have enjoyed the chase." A waiter appeared silently, filling their water glasses before disappearing again. "But this is better. More civilized." "There is nothing civilized about this," she shot back. "Isn't there?" He mused, steepling his fingers, his eyes never leaving hers. "A beautiful woman, a handsome man, the best restaurant in the city. It sounds very civilized to me. It's the foundation of courtship." "This isn't a courtship, Mr. Rossi. It's a kidnapping with better food." His smile widened. He was enjoying this. He was enjoying her defiance. "You have a sharp tongue. I like that. It matches the fire in your eyes." He leaned forward, his voice dropping, becoming more intimate. "I told you, Valentina, I always get what I want. And from the moment you crashed through my door, a beautiful, furious, avenging angel, I knew I wanted you. I want to know what makes you burn so brightly. I want to know everything about you. And what you want, you take," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "I do," he confirmed, without a trace of apology. "But I also protect what is mine. And make no mistake, you are mine now." The words hung in the air, a blatant, shocking declaration of possession. The sheer arrogance of it stole her breath, but it also sent a strange, unwelcome thrill through her veins. It was terrifying, it was wrong, but a part of her, A deep, hidden part she didn't want to acknowledge was captivated by the force of his will. The tug-of-war had begun. He had made his move, pulling the rope with all his strength. Now, it was her turn to pull back. "I don't belong to anyone," she said, her voice low and fierce. Adrian Rossi just smiled, a slow, confident expression that said he had all the time in the world to prove her wrong. "We'll see," he murmured, as the waiter returned to take their order. "We'll see." The waiter, a phantom in a crisp white jacket, took their order without a word, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Adrian's shoulder. Adrian had not asked Valentina what she wanted. He had simply ordered for them both, a selection of the chef's most celebrated dishes, his voice a low, confident murmur that assumed her compliance. It was another power play, small and seemingly polite, yet it was a clear statement. He was in control of this situation, of her plate, of her evening. "You presume to know my tastes?" Valentina said, her voice tight, as soon as the waiter had vanished back into the shadows. Adrian leaned back in his chair, a picture of relaxed command. "I presume that a woman who would kick down a door in a fit of righteous fury has a palate for things that are bold, complex, and have a little bit of heat. Am I wrong?" She hated that he was not. She hated the way he saw her, the way he seemed to look past her defenses and see the very core of her. "You see what you want to see, Mr. Rossi." "Please, call me Adrian," he said, his smile never wavering. "And I see a woman of passion." "Passion is the most valuable currency in the world, Valentina. More than money, more than power. Because it is the one thing that cannot be faked." He gestured around the empty, silent restaurant. All of this, can be bought. But the fire in your eyes when you stood in that doorway, that is priceless. His words were a silken trap, designed to flatter and disarm. She could feel their insidious pull, the vanity in her that wanted to believe him. It was a weakness, and she fought against it. "My fire, as you call it, was for a man who betrayed me. It was about anger and humiliation. It had nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me now," he corrected softly. "That man, your boyfriend, he was a fool. He held a masterpiece in his hands and treated it like a cheap print. He doesn't deserve your passion. He doesn't deserve your anger." The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of seared scallops on a bed of saffron risotto. The scent was divine, and despite herself, Valentina's stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten since that morning, her day consumed by fear and adrenaline. She picked up her fork, her movements stiff. "Tell me about your art," Adrian said, changing the subject with the same effortless control he did everything else. Valentina's head snapped up. "I told you, I want to know everything about you." It wasn't difficult to find out. Valentina Cruz, a freelance graphic designer, talented but struggling. You take on boring corporate logos to pay the bills, but your personal work is where your heart is. Abstract, full of color and violent emotion. He took a bite of his scallop, his eyes fixed on her. "I saw some of it online. It's magnificent. It's you." A cold dread washed over her, colder than the fear she had felt in the penthouse. He had been digging into her life. He had seen her work, her private, personal expressions of her soul, and he was dissecting them here, at this table, in this silent, empty room. It was a violation, a profound and intimate intrusion that felt worse than any physical threat. "You had no right," she whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of fury. "I have every right," he countered, his voice losing its gentle edge and taking on the hardness of steel. "You entered my world, Valentina. You kicked down the door. Did you think you could just walk back out and close it behind you? That is not how my world works. When something or someone captures my interest, I learn everything there is to know. I understand it, I appreciate it, and I possess it." The food tasted like ash in her mouth. She put her fork down. The tug-of-war was no longer a metaphor. It was a physical sensation, a rope pulled taut between his unshakable will and her desperate need for freedom. "I am not a painting you can buy, Adrian. I am not a company you can acquire." "No," he agreed, a flicker of something unreadable in his dark eyes. "You are not. You are so much more." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting his words sink in. That fire, that passion, it's wasted on cheap logos for soulless companies. It should be set free. You should be creating for yourself, not for them. And I suppose you're the patron who will make that happen? She asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. I am, he said, completely serious. I will give you anything you need. A studio, supplies, connections, a gallery show, anything. All I ask in return is that you create. And that you do it for me. It was the most tempting offer she had ever received. It was her wildest dream, handed to her on a silver platter by the devil himself, the struggling artist in her, the one who was so tired of compromising, of fighting for every scrap, cried out to say yes. But the woman, the person who valued her freedom above all else, knew the price was too high. The price was her soul. No, she said, the word a stone in the quiet room. Adrian's smile didn't falter. He didn't look surprised or angry. He looked pleased. I would have been disappointed if you had said yes so easily, he murmured. The chase is always the best part. The rest of the dinner passed in a similar vein. It was a battle of wills, a constant push and pull. He would ask her about her childhood, her dreams, her fears, his questions probing and unnervingly perceptive. She would resist, giving him nothing, only to find him twisting her deflections into new insights, new ways of seeing her. He was intelligent, charming, and utterly ruthless. He spoke of art and history with a knowledge that surprised her, then would make a casual reference to a business deal that sounded more like a threat, reminding her exactly who he was. She was walking a tightrope, balanced between a terrifying abyss and a strange, exhilarating thrill. The part of her that had always been a fighter, the part that had kicked down that door, was engaged in a way it had never been before. She was outmatched. She knew that, but she would not, could not, surrender. When the meal was over, he escorted her out of the restaurant, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The touch was electric, a brand of possession that sent a shiver through her. The black car was waiting, the engine purring silently. He opened the door for her, then slid in beside her, his presence filling the small, enclosed space. The air grew thick, charged with an unspoken tension. The ride back to her apartment was silent, but it was a silence that screamed. Valentina stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, hyper, aware of his thigh just inches from hers, of the scent of his cologne, of the sheer physical power of the man sitting beside her. She felt like a captured bird in a cage, being transported to a new, unknown territory. When the car pulled up in front of her building, she expected him to let her go, but he got out with her, walking her to the front door of the old walk. Up, the street was quiet, bathed in the orange glow of the streetlights. I had a pleasant evening, Valentina, he said, his voice a low murmur in the quiet night. It was an interrogation, she countered, her hand on the doorknob. He smiled. The first of many, I hope. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently trace the line of the lock on her door. These locks, they make you feel safe? The question was casual, but the implication was chilling. He was telling her that her locks were meaningless, that if he wanted to get to her, he could. They're a deterrent, she said, her voice steady. For boys like Mark, he agreed, not for men like me. He let his hand drop. Valentina. You have a busy day tomorrow. Before she could ask what he meant, he turned and walked back to the car, his long coat swirling around him. He didn't look back. She watched until the car disappeared around the corner, then she stumbled inside, her legs shaking. She locked the 3 locks, her hands trembling, knowing with a sickening certainty that he was right. They were useless. The next morning, her doorbell buzzed at precisely 9 o'clock. Her heart leaped into her throat, thinking it was him. She crept to the door, peering through the peephole. It was 2 delivery men in matching uniforms, struggling with several large, heavy boxes. With a sense of dread, she opened the door. Delivery for Valentina Cruz, one of them grunted. Where do you want it? She stared at the boxes. They were from a high-end electronics and art supply store. I I didn't order anything. It's already paid for, the man said, impatient. Just tell us where to put it. Numbly, she pointed to the corner of her living room that served as her studio. It took them 20 minutes to bring everything up. When they were gone, she stood in the middle of her small apartment, surrounded by boxes. Slowly, as if in a dream, she began to open them. The first contained a state-of-the-art, however, computer, the most powerful model on the market, with a monitor so large and crisp it looked like a window into another world. The next held a professional-grade digital drawing tablet, the kind she had only ever dreamed of owning. There were boxes of software, external hard drives, and a printer that could produce gallery-quality prints. And then there were the art supplies, boxes filled with the finest paints, canvases of every size, brushes made from sable, and pencils of every conceivable grade. It was a king's ransom of artistic tools. It was everything she had ever wanted, everything she needed to stop being a struggling artist and just be an artist. Her hands trembled as she lifted the drawing tablet from its box. It was sleek and cool to the touch. Taped to its surface was a single, cream-colored card. The script was the same elegant, masculine hand. Asterisk, you said no. But I don't hear that word. Create something for me, Valentina. Show me your fire. Asterisk. There was no signature. He didn't need one. She sank to the floor, the tablet in her lap, the card clutched in her hand. He hadn't just invaded her life. He had invaded her art, her sanctuary. This was not a gift. It was a gilded cage. He was binding her to him with her own dreams. Every brushstroke she made with these supplies, every line she drew on this tablet, would be for him. He was her patron, her captor, her audience. The tug-of-war had just escalated. He had stopped pulling on the rope and had instead begun to weave it around her, tying her to him with threads of her own ambition and desire. She could refuse. She could leave the boxes unopened, let them gather dust in the corner, a monument to her defiance. But she knew she wouldn't. The artist in her was too hungry, too desperate to create. He knew it too. That was his victory. He had found her weakness, not her fear, but her passion. And he was going to use it to own her completely. The red dress of defiance she had worn last night suddenly felt like a foolish, naive gesture. The real battle wasn't going to be fought with words or angry glares. It was going to be fought here, in the silence of her studio, with a blank canvas and a collection of beautiful, terrifying gifts. And she had a sickening feeling that it was a battle she was destined to lose. For days, the boxes remained unopened, a silent, monolithic monument to her defiance in the center of her small living room. They were a fortress, and she was the lone soldier laying siege to her own temptation. Valentina circled them like a wary animal, her anger a brittle shield against the siren song of possibility they represented. She would work on her old, sputtering laptop, its fan whirring in protest, the screen flickering with dying pixels, and she would pointedly ignore the sleek, black box that contained its state of the art replacement. She would sketch on cheap paper with worn pencils, her knuckles white with the effort of not reaching for the velvet, lined cases that held pencils of every conceivable grade, charcoal sticks that promised the deepest blacks, and pastels that held the colors of a sunrise. It was a war of attrition, and she was losing. The artist in her, the part of her that was most true, was starving. The corporate logos she designed to pay her rent felt more soulless than ever. Their clean lines and sterile palettes, a mockery of the vibrant, chaotic energy that churned inside her. Her personal work stalled. Every idea felt hollow, every attempted sketch a pale imitation of the vision in her head, a vision she knew she could only truly realize with the tools that sat, waiting, in those boxes. Adrian had known. He had not just bought her a gift, he had diagnosed her deepest, most desperate need, and offered her the only cure, at a price that was everything she had. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, a week after the delivery. A client had rejected a logo design for the 5th time, asking for it to be more blue, but a friendly blue, like a puppy's eye. The sheer, mind-numbing absurdity of it snapped something inside her. She closed the laptop with a sharp crack, the sound of her surrender. Her gaze fell on the boxes. the fight was over. With a sense of grim finality, she knelt on the floor and slit the tape on the first box with a kitchen knife. The scent of new electronics, of plastic and potential, filled the air. She unpacked the computer, the massive monitor, the tablet, her movements slow and deliberate, like a priestess preparing a sacrifice. Each piece was perfect, a marvel of engineering and design. She set it all up on her desk, the new technology making her old, cluttered workspace look like a relic from a forgotten age. Then came the art supplies. She ran her fingers over the pristine canvases, their texture a promise of creation. She opened the wooden cases of paints, a rainbow of possibilities, the pigments so rich and pure they seemed to vibrate with a life of their own. It was an armory, and she was finally taking up her weapons. She didn't know what she was going to create. She only knew that it had to come out. She selected the largest canvas, a vast, intimidating square of white, and set it on her easel. She squeezed dollops of paint onto a new, clean palette, her hands moving with an urgency she hadn't felt in years. She chose red first, a deep, visceral crimson, the color of her dress, the color of blood and warning. Then black, as dark and absolute as his eyes. Then gold, the color of the penthouse, of the gilded cage he was building around her. She didn't sketch, she didn't plan, she attacked the canvas. The first stroke was a slash of red, a violent, angry gash across the pristine white. It felt like a release, a scream given form. She worked for hours, losing all track of time. The sun set outside her window, casting long shadows that danced with the frantic movements of her brush. Her small apartment was silent, save for the wet slap of the brush against the canvas and her own ragged breathing. She was not painting a picture, she was painting a feeling. She was painting the fury of her betrayal by Mark, the icy terror of the penthouse, the suffocating weight of Adrian's possession, and the glorious, terrible temptation of the power he had given her. It was a storm of color and emotion. A chaotic vortex of red and black dominated the center, a swirling abyss that threatened to consume everything. But from the chaos, streaks of gold and brilliant white erupted, fighting their way out, reaching for the edges of the canvas. It was a battle, a war between darkness and light, between captivity and freedom. It was her soul, laid bare. When she was finally done, she stepped back, her body aching, her hands and clothes smeared with paint. She was exhausted, drained, but she also felt a profound, exhilarating sense of release. The painting was alive. It was raw, violent, and beautiful. It was the most honest thing she had ever created, and it was for him. The thought landed with the cold weight of a stone. This masterpiece, born from her deepest turmoil, belonged to Adrian Rossi. He had commissioned it not with money, but with a perfect understanding of her own weakness. He had not just bought her tools, he had bought the art itself, before it was even created. She slept for 12 hours, a deep, dreamless sleep of pure exhaustion. When she woke, the painting dominated her apartment, its raw energy changing the very atmosphere of the room. She couldn't look away from it. It was a part of her, and yet it was alien, a testament to the man who had so thoroughly invaded her life. She spent the day in a daze, cleaning her new brushes with a reverence she had never afforded her old ones, organizing the paints, her mind strangely quiet. The storm had passed, leaving a quiet, uncertain landscape in its wake. The next morning, the knock came. It was the same man who had delivered the rose, the mountain in a suit, his face a blank slate. This time, he held not a box, but a long, flat portfolio case made of expensive black leather. He didn't offer it to her. "Mr. Rossi sent me to collect the painting," he said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. Valentina stared at him, then at the canvas on the easel. A fierce, protective instinct flared within her. "It's not for sale." The man's expression did not change. "It is already sold," he replied, his voice flat, final. He stepped past her into the apartment, his presence sucking the air out of the room. He moved toward the easel with a surprising grace for a man his size. He studied the painting for a long moment, and for a fraction of a second, Valentina thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief, quickly suppressed reaction to the raw emotion on the canvas. Then it was gone. He produced a set of tools and, with an expert's precision, began to carefully remove the canvas from its stretcher bars. "What are you doing?" she cried, stepping forward. He didn't look at her. "Mr. Rossi wants it delivered immediately." She watched, helpless, as he gently rolled the canvas, his movements practiced and efficient, and slid it into the leather portfolio. He was treating it like a priceless artifact, which, she supposed, it was. It was the first piece of her soul that Adrian had claimed. He secured the case, turned, and walked toward the door. "Wait," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and despair. Tell him I hate him." The man paused at the door, his back to her. He turned his head slightly, his gaze unreadable. "Mr. Rossi knows," he said, and then he was gone. The words hung in the air, more chilling than any threat. He knows. He knew she hated him, and he didn't care. Or worse, he enjoyed it. He fed on it. Her hatred was just another flavor of the passion he wanted to consume. Her apartment felt vast and empty without the painting. The blank space where the easel stood was a wound. She had poured her heart and soul onto that canvas, and he had sent his golem to simply take it away, leaving her with nothing but the expensive tools of her own damnation. She didn't create for the rest of the week. The new supplies sat, pristine and mocking. The fire had been stolen from her. She felt hollowed out, a vessel that had been emptied. She tried to work on her corporate designs, but the friendly blues and insipid shapes felt like a personal insult. Her world had been filled with violent reds and consuming blacks, and she could no longer pretend otherwise. On Friday evening, a package arrived. It was a small, flat box, delivered by a regular courier this time. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, was a phone. It was the latest model, sleek and impossibly thin. There was no note. She turned it on, and the screen lit up with a single, pre-installed contact. Adrian. As she stared at the name, the phone buzzed in her hand. A text message had appeared on the screen. It was a picture. She recognized it instantly. It was her painting, but it was not in a gallery or a warehouse. It was hanging on a wall of dark, paneled wood, illuminated by a single, perfectly placed spotlight. It was the only piece of art in the room, and it commanded the space completely. It was hanging in the penthouse suite. He had replaced the tribunal table and the hard-backed chairs with a simple, elegant viewing area. He had turned the room where he held his dark counsels, the room where she had first stumbled into his world, into a private gallery for her work. For his time's work, a second message came through. It is magnificent, more beautiful than I imagined. You have such fire, Valentina. Now, paint me another. The words were a command, a caress, and a threat all in one. He had taken her rage and her fear and hung it on his wall as a trophy, and now he wanted more. The phone felt heavy in her hand, a direct line to her captor, a leash he could tug whenever he pleased. The tug-of-war was over. He wasn't pulling the rope anymore. He had tied it around her neck, and he was slowly, inexorably pulling her in. Her fingers trembled as she typed a reply, her fury a fresh, hot wave. Go to hell. She hit send before she could stop herself. The message was marked as delivered, then read. For a long, agonizing minute, there was no reply. She held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. Then, the phone buzzed again. I am already there, Valentina. The message read. And I am bringing you with me. Valentina's fingers went numb, the phone a block of ice in her hand. His words were not a clever retort, they were a prophecy. I am already there. Valentina, and I am bringing you with me. Hell was not a place of fire and brimstone. It was a penthouse suite with a single painting on the wall. It was a silent, empty restaurant where your soul was served as the main course. It was the chilling, absolute certainty of a man who did not ask, did not negotiate, but simply took. She wanted to throw the phone, to shatter it against the wall, and sever the connection, to silence his voice in her head. But she couldn't. The act felt childishly futile. He had sent her the phone for a reason. It was his leash, and throwing it away would not set her free. It would only be a temporary, defiant gesture before he inevitably found another way to reach her, another way to pull her closer. Her breath hitched, a sob of pure rage and terror catching in her throat. She had been so naive. Her little act of defiance, her go to hell, had been exactly what he wanted. She was a mouse batting at the lion's paw, and the lion was amused. He wasn't playing a game of chess. He was a force of nature, and she was just a leaf caught in his storm. The anger that had been her shield for so long was useless against him. It was merely fuel for his fire. He didn't want to extinguish her spirit. He wanted to own it, to watch it burn for his own private amusement. A new kind of coldness seeped into her, a chilling clarity that pushed past the hot fury. If fighting back directly only entertained him, then she had to change her strategy. She couldn't win a war of wills with a man whose will was absolute. But she was an artist. Her battleground was the canvas. Her weapons were color and emotion. He wanted another painting. He had commanded it, and she would give him one. But it would not be the same raw, chaotic scream as the first. This one would be different. It would be cold, precise, and full of a quiet, venomous hatred that he would not be able to hang on his wall as a trophy of her passion. It would be a mirror, and in it, she would show him the monster he was. The decision settled in her, a sliver of ice in the turmoil of her heart. She would not reply to his text. She would give him silence. She would let him wait, and she would create. She walked back to her studio, the new supplies gleaming under the lights, no longer a temptation, but an arsenal. She selected another large canvas and placed it on the easel, the blank white space a silent challenge. This time, she did not reach for the fiery reds or the consuming blacks. She reached for blues, cold and deep as the abyss. She chose grays, the color of stone and ash. And she chose white, not the white of light and hope, but the stark, sterile white of bone. The next 2 weeks were a blur of quiet, focused work. Valentina fell into a routine that was almost monastic. She woke, she painted, she ate when she remembered, and she slept when exhaustion finally claimed her. She did not answer the phone when it buzzed with texts from Adrian, which it did once a day, every day. They were simple, probing. Asterisk. Are you creating for me, Valentina? Asterisk, one read. Asterisk. Silence is a canvas of its own. Asterisk, said another. Asterisk. I am a patient man, but my patience has its limits. Asterisk. She read each one, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest, and then she would turn back to her work, pouring her silent, icy rage onto the canvas. During this time, her old life began to quietly dismantle itself. The 2 small, regular freelance clients she had maintained for years both sent polite, apologetic emails terminating their contracts, citing internal restructuring. Her landlord, a friendly, pot-bellied man who had always been happy to let the rent be a few days late, suddenly became a stickler for rules, sending her a formal notice about a minor noise complaint she knew was fabricated. It was him, Adrian. He was cutting the moorings, one by one, setting her adrift so that she would have no choice but to float toward his shore. The subtlety of it was terrifying. There were no overt threats, no men in dark suits at her door. Just a series of unfortunate events that were isolating her, making her world smaller, making him the only thing left in it. One evening, another package arrived. It was not from a courier, but had been left silently outside her door. It was a large, flat parcel, wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a book. It was a rare, out-of-print collection of works by a niche abstract expressionist painter she had mentioned once, in passing, during their dinner at Il Silencio. She had said it was the book that had first inspired her to paint. She had no idea he had even been listening. Her hands trembled as she held it. This was a new kind of violation. He wasn't just watching her, he was remembering her words, cataloging her dreams, using her own past against her. Tucked inside the front cover was a card, asterisk. Every artist needs their inspiration, asterisk, it read. Asterisk, I look forward to being yours. Asterisk, that night, she finished the painting. It was the antithesis of the first. Where the first had been a hot, chaotic storm, this was a frozen, desolate landscape. It was a world of sharp, geometric shapes, of cold, unforgiving lines. In the center was a figure, barely recognizable as human, constructed from shards of gray and white, trapped within a cage of intersecting blue lines. The figure was screaming, but it was a silent scream, its agony conveyed not through color, but through the tortured, twisted angles of its form. There was no passion in it, there was only despair. It was a portrait of a soul being systematically frozen to death. It was beautiful, and it was horrifying. It was her message back to him. She did not have to wait long. The next morning, the mountain in the suit was at her door with the leather portfolio. He entered without a word, his eyes falling on the new canvas. He stopped, and this time, the flicker of reaction was unmistakable. A brief, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, a darkness in his eyes. He had seen the message. He rolled the canvas with his usual efficiency, his movements betraying a new, subtle tension. As he stood at the door, ready to leave, Valentina spoke, her voice as cold as the painting itself. "Does he know what this one means?" she asked. The man paused, his hand on the doorknob. He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than blank obedience in his face. It was a deep, profound weariness, the look of a man who had seen too much. "Mr. Rossi," he said, his voice a low rumble, "understands everything." After he left, Valentina felt a strange sense of calm. She had sent her reply. The ball was in his court. She knew there would be a response, a retaliation, but for a few hours, there was silence. She used the time to pack a small bag, a few clothes, her sketchbook, her oldest, most worn pencils, the ones that were hers and hers alone. She didn't know where she would go, but she knew she couldn't stay here, waiting for his next move. It was a futile gesture, she knew. He would find her. But she had to do something. She had to feel, for a few hours at least, that she was not just a pawn in his game. As she was zipping the bag, the black phone buzzed. It was a call. His name, Adrian glowed on the screen. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had a choice. She could ignore it, run, and wait for the inevitable. Or she could answer it, face him, and fight. Her hand shook as she pressed the green icon and raised the phone to her ear. "Valentina." His voice was a low, dangerous purr, devoid of any of the amused charm he had shown before. It was the voice he used in the penthouse, the voice of absolute command. "You are a very clever woman." "I'm an artist," she replied, her own voice surprisingly steady. "I paint what I see." There was a pause. She could hear the faint sound of his breathing. "And you see a monster." "I see a man who builds cages," she shot back. "Cages keep things safe," he said smoothly. "They protect valuable things from the outside world." There was another pause, longer this time. "I am looking at your painting now. It is honest. It has a cold, terrible beauty. But it is not what I asked for. I asked for your fire, not your ice. You can't order passion like you ordered dinner, Adrian." "Perhaps not," he conceded. "But I can create the conditions for it. You are distracted, Valentina. Your apartment, your bills, your pathetic little life. It is all noise that gets in the way of the art. I am going to remove the noise." A cold dread washed over her. "What are you going to do?" "I have a place for you," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "A studio. Not just a corner of your tiny apartment, but a real studio. North, facing light, high ceilings, everything an artist could ever dream of. It is in a building I own. It is completely secure. You will have no rent to pay, no bills to worry about. You will have nothing to do but create. For me, it was the gilded cage made real." "No," she said, the word catching in her throat. "Absolutely not." "That was not a request," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. "My driver will be at your door in 1 hour. He will take you to your new home. If you are not there, I will send my men to find you, and I assure you, they will not be as polite as my driver. You wanted a war, Valentina. Congratulations, you have one. But you seem to have forgotten which one of us has the army." The line went dead. Valentina stood in the silent apartment, the phone clutched in her hand, his words echoing in the empty space. He had called her bluff. He had seen her icy defiance and raised her total annihilation. She looked at the small bag she had packed, her pathetic attempt at escape. It was useless. He was right. She had a box of pencils, and he had an army. The tug-of-war was over. He had let go of the rope, and she was falling, tumbling into the abyss he had prepared for her. The only question left was what she would find when she hit the bottom. The hour that followed was the longest of Valentina's life. The silence in her apartment was absolute, a vacuum where his voice had been. The world outside her window, the familiar city street with its orange sodium glow, seemed like a distant planet she could no longer reach. He had cut the moorings, she was adrift in his ocean, and the tide was pulling her inexorably toward him. The small bag she had packed sat by the door, a pathetic symbol of a freedom that had been an illusion all along. Running was a child's solution to a monster that owned the entire forest. A strange, cold calm settled over her. The terror was still there, a frozen knot in her stomach, but the frantic, panicked energy was gone, burned away by the stark finality of his ultimatum. This was not a battle she could win with defiance or escape. He had shown her that her fire only amused him and her ice only challenged him. Both were reactions, and as long as she was only reacting to him, he was in control. She walked over to the bag and unzipped it. She took out the worn sketchbook and the small tin of pencils, the tools of her old life, the ones that held the memory of a time before him. She held them in her hands, the smooth, familiar wood a comforting weight. He could give her an arsenal of the world's finest supplies, but he could not give her this. The history etched into the worn graphite, the ghost of 1,000 old ideas. She would not run. She would walk into the cage, but she would not go empty-handed. She would carry this small, secret part of herself with her. He could own her body, her time, her art, but this tiny spark of her past, of herself before Adrian Rossi, this would remain hers. It was a pitifully small act of rebellion, but it was the only one she had left. She sat on the floor, opened the sketchbook to a clean page, and waited. The knock on the door came exactly 1 hour later. It was not the mountain in the suit. It was a different man, older, with silvering hair at his temples and a face that was less a blank slate and more a carefully composed mask of polite indifference. He was Adrian's driver, she presumed. He did not speak, merely inclined his head toward the open door, a silent summons. Valentina picked up her small bag, leaving everything else behind. The apartment, with its half-finished logos on the old laptop and the ghosts of her former life, no longer felt like hers. It was just a room she was leaving. The ride was silent. The car was an even more luxurious model than the last, a cocoon of black leather and polished wood that smelled faintly of Adrian's cologne. It moved through the city with an unnerving smoothness, the chaos of the streets kept at a distance by the thick, tinted glass. They drove north, toward the river, to a part of the city she had only ever seen in magazines. The buildings grew taller, sleeker, their glass and steel facades reflecting the gray afternoon sky. They pulled into a private underground garage beneath a residential skyscraper that looked less like a building and more like a shard of obsidian piercing the clouds. The driver led her to a private elevator. He used a key card, then pressed the button for the top floor, the penthouse. Her blood ran cold. Was he taking her back there, to that room? But the elevator stopped 2 floors below the top. The doors opened directly into a vast, empty space. This was not a residence. This was the studio. It stole her breath. The entire floor was one open room, a cavern of polished concrete floors and white walls. The far wall was a single, seamless sheet of glass that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic, God's-eye view of the entire city. The light, even on this overcast day, was magnificent, a pure, clean, northern light that was an artist's dream. In the center of the room stood a single, massive easel, holding a canvas even larger than the ones he had sent her. To one side were flat file cabinets for storing work, and along another wall was a long workbench, neatly organized with every art supply imaginable. In a far corner, discreetly tucked away, was a small, minimalist kitchen, and a door that she assumed led to a bathroom. It was perfect. It was a temple built for the worship of art, and it was the most beautiful, terrifying prison she had ever seen. The driver placed her small bag on the floor. "Mr. Rossi will be here shortly," he said, his first and only words to her. He retreated to the elevator, the doors sliding shut with a soft, final whoosh, leaving her alone in the silent, echoing space. She walked to the wall of glass, drawn by the view. The city was spread out below her like a map. She could see the Grand Elysian Hotel, the place where this had all begun. It looked like a child's toy from up here. She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, a feeling of being completely detached from the world she knew. On the workbench, a single cream-colored card was propped against a jar of brushes. Asterisk. "Welcome home, Valentina. Create for me." Asterisk. She ignored it. She ignored the pristine canvas and the siren song of the perfectly organized supplies. She walked back to her bag, her one small anchor to her former self. She sat on the cold concrete floor, leaned her back against a wall, and opened her sketchbook. She took out one of her old, familiar pencils. She looked not at the grand vista of the city, but at her own hand, the one holding the pencil. And she began to draw. She drew the lines on her palm, the calluses on her fingers from years of holding a brush. She drew the chipped nail polish on her thumb. It was a small, intimate, and deeply personal subject. It was a map of her own history, a declaration that this hand, this body, was still hers. She lost herself in the familiar scrape of graphite on paper, the simple, honest act of creation for no one's eyes but her own. The sun began to set, and the city lights began to glitter like a fallen constellation, but she did not look up. She did not hear the elevator. She only knew he was there when his shadow fell over her sketchbook. She froze, her pencil hovering over the page. This is not what I expected to find. Adrian's voice was a low, controlled rumble, but she could hear the edge of cold fury beneath it. She looked up. He stood over her, a towering figure in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his face a mask of thunderous displeasure. His eyes were not on her, but on the small, insignificant sketchbook in her lap. "You have a kingdom at your disposal," he said. His voice dangerously soft as he gestured to the magnificent studio, to the waiting canvas, to the city glittering at their feet. "And you choose to sit on the floor and doodle in a child's notebook." Valentina's heart was a frantic bird beating against her ribs, but her voice was calm, imbued with the quiet certainty she had found in the last few hours. "This is not a doodle, and it is not for you." He crouched down, bringing himself to her level. He was so close she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the muscle that twitched in his jaw. He did not look at her face, but at the drawing of her hand. He studied it for a long, silent moment. "I gave you a palace," he hissed, "and you bring your hovel with you." "You gave me a cage," she corrected, finally meeting his gaze. His eyes were black with a possessive rage that would have once terrified her. Now, it only clarified her resolve. "A beautiful, perfect cage. You can put me in it. You can give me the finest seed and the cleanest water, but you cannot make me sing for you." He reached out and took the sketchbook from her hands. He handled it with a strange reverence, his long fingers tracing the worn cover before opening it to her drawing. He stared at the image of her hand, his expression unreadable. "I can break you, Valentina," he whispered, the threat a cold promise. "I can take everything from you until the only thing you have left is the desire to please me." "You can," she agreed, her voice not breaking. "You can break my body. You can probably even break my mind. But you will not get what you want. You will get the art you deserve, the art of a broken thing. You will get cold, dead canvases, like the last one. You will never, ever get my fire, because my fire doesn't come from this." She gestured to the lavish studio. "It comes from this." She held up her other hand, the one she had been drawing, clenching it into a fist. "It comes from me, and you do not own me." The words hung in the silent, cavernous room. It was the ultimate gamble, the final, desperate move in a war she could not win by conventional means. She was offering him the truth. He could have her obedience, or he could have her art. He could not have both. Adrian looked from the drawing in his hand to her face, and for the first time, he seemed to see her not as a beautiful object to be possessed, but as an adversary, an equal. The fury in his eyes slowly, almost imperceptibly, receded, replaced by a dawning, reluctant understanding. He had tried to capture a storm in a bottle, and she was telling him the storm would die there. He looked at the massive, empty canvas on the easel, then back at the small, intimate drawing of her hand. He wanted the grand masterpiece, the explosion of passion and color. But the source of it was here, in this small, stubborn, defiant act. He closed the sketchbook and handed it back to her. "The cage is open, Valentina," he said, his voice quiet, resigned. He stood up, his towering presence once again filling the space. "You can stay in your hovel on the floor, or you can use the palace I have built for you. You can paint your little secrets in your little book, or you can give me the fire I demand on that canvas. The choice, it seems, has always been yours." He turned and walked to the elevator without another word. He did not look back. The doors slid open, he stepped inside, and then he was gone. Valentina sat on the floor, her sketchbook in her lap, her heart pounding with a wild, terrifying, and triumphant rhythm. The tug-of-war was over. She had not won, not in any conventional sense. She was still in his world, still in his building, still bound to him by 1,000 invisible threads, but she had not lost. She had fought the devil for her own soul and emerged, not unscathed but whole. She slowly got to her feet and walked to the center of the room, to the massive, waiting canvas. She looked at the city lights, at the kingdom he had laid at her feet. It was still a cage, but he had just told her the door was open. She could create what she wanted. He could not force her passion. He could only wait for her to give it to him. And in that, there was a new kind of power. She laid her old sketchbook and pencils on the workbench. Then she picked up one of his brushes, the bristles new and perfect. She dipped it into the pot of crimson paint, the color of warning, of passion, of fire. She faced the canvas, the vast expanse of white possibility, and for the first time since she had kicked down that penthouse door, she smiled. The war was not over. It had just begun. And now, she was ready to fight.